Well, today is December 7th, 2022, which just coincidentally happens to be Pearl Harbor Day. Mm-hmm. And I am Tamara Stevens, and I'm interviewing Wendy Fote. Mm-hmm. Where do you live?
We live here in Petoskey.
Okay. And are you married?
Yes. 30, don't get me wrong on this, 34 years, I believe.
And what's his name?
Chris Fote.
Chris Fote. And do you have any children?
We do. We have 2 children and then 2 son and daughter-in-laws. So Christopher, and he's married to Megan, and our daughter Katie, who is married to Luke.
Okay. Any grandchildren?
Yes. We have Reagan and Jameson.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
By Christopher and Megan.
By Christopher and
Yeah.
Megan. And tell me about the person in your family who was in the military.
Sure. So that's our son, Christopher. He was in the Army for 10 years, rose to the rank of captain. And as an unusual story, because we're not from a military family. Chris and I were not military. But Christopher, from a very young age, knew that that's what he wanted to do. He told us, I think he was about 8, that he wanted to go into the service, and we just kind of looked at each other like, okay, kind of like, I want to be a fireman. But we knew it was probably going to happen as we traveled. One year we went to Gettysburg for a family vacation, and Christopher loved history. And there was a family there, and he went up to them and started telling them the history of what had happened at that location. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And so it kind of went underground for a little bit. And I think it was probably Christopher sensing that we were kind of like, what? But in 10th grade, Christopher went on a mission trip to China. And it was a Christian mission trip. And he came home realizing that there they had to hide the Bible. They wanted to worship. They had to go up into the mountains. And he came home and said, I need to protect our freedoms here, and this is what I want to do. So we said, okay. And at that time, it was the Marines, which love the Marines, but boy, that's a jump for the school he was in. But yeah, so he kind of just set his mindset on that, and he did it.
So then after high school, where did he go?
He went to Ferris State University and went and enlisted in the National Guard. And I believe it was Halloween weekend, so pretty close starting at Ferris. And we were supportive of that. And so he did the whole National Guard deal where you go away for a weekend, a month, and he became a private in the Guard. His junior year, he joined ROTC, which is training to become an officer in the Army. So he was a private training to be an officer, and went through the ROTC program and graduated Ferris, and then right after became a second lieutenant in the Army, and then that gives up the National Guard position. So yeah, he's very driven and very assured that he was going to do this. He's a big guy, 6'6", about, I'm not even going to guess his weight, but he's a big guy. And so he was able to do, they got to run fast, and Lord willing, his whole troop behind him, whatever, encouraged him, and he was able to do everything he needed to do. So yeah, so it was a really proud moment. His grandfather, who was in the Korean War Army at that time, was able to give Christopher his first salute when he was commissioned. So that was a really,
gives me goosebumps.
Yeah, that was a really special time, and we have a photograph of that, and I think almost everybody's almost crying, during that. So yeah, so it was a very proud moment for all of us.
So after graduation, he joined the Army.
Yes.
And went to boot camp then?
Yep, he's off doing all the active duty things, advanced training and So he was at Fort Leonard Wood, he was at Fort Lewis out in Seattle, getting all that, and then he got his first assignment. He went to Fort Drum, New York. So that's where he was stationed pretty quickly. So, and that he wanted to go that area. He wanted Northern Territory, colder territory. So Fort Drum was it.
And then when did he get deployed?
So pretty quickly in 2011, I believe, was his first deployment. Both of his deployments, so he's been deployed twice to Afghanistan, and both of them were kind of like a whirlwind. We were going out to California to see his sister, Katie and Luke, for Christmas, and we were scheduled for him to come, and then all of a sudden things just spun around, and he was actually having to go sooner than we had anticipated. So he ended up not doing that trip with us. The second deployment, he was scheduled to be in his best friend's wedding. So he had both the bride and the groom were his best friends. And he was going to make it by about a week. And it was here in Petoskey. And of course, right before the wedding, his deployment got moved up. And so he couldn't come to the wedding. And the bride and groom, you know how the groomsmen are all lined up, they left his space empty, and the bridesmaid walked up with a flag. I just lost it the whole wedding. The bride had to come up and ask me if I was okay. So both deployments were fast and furious, and kind of faster than we anticipated. Yeah.
Can you tell me about his first deployment?
Yeah, so, you know, it's a lot of blur for me. I used to, like, he got me a Military for Dummies book, you know, trying to learn the acronyms and the languages. It's completely different. And, you know, I'd have him, could you lay out the hierarchy and tell me where you are and what you were doing? But he was field artillery, so he was fire support. So don't know a lot about what that is, but it doesn't sound good to a mom's ears.
No. Fire.
Yeah, fire support, all that kind of thing. And so all we really knew is that I knew or wanted to know is that he was really kind of in the heat of the battle in Afghanistan, calling in the fire support. And so thankfully the deployments were only 9 months. That seems like a short time, but it's really a long time in a lot of ways. And so, you know, what I knew what he was doing was just the big cannons, the big guns, calling in fire support if troops were in the mix of things and they needed, you know, more firepower coming in. So, yeah, so that's kind of the overview of the first deployment that he had.
But he wasn't wounded?
No, he was not. And we were able to keep fairly good communications because of, you know, social media or messaging or Skyping and that type of thing. Not a lot of letters, but you know, getting Christmas packages ready months in advance because you have to be sending early. So we knew he was okay, but you're just always wondering. I would remember seeing, like, he would post something on social media and I'd be like, oh, good, you know, I know he's okay today. Fort Drum does a wonderful welcome home ceremony. And as the soldiers are coming back, the parents are invited, you know, I guess more than just parents, but we're in the gym waiting for the troops to come in, and you've seen the big plane and you know they're out there somewhere getting ready, but you haven't seen them. I'll tear up because I do. And then they walk them in as their unit. And you're sitting in the gym, and you see your son after 9 months. Sorry, it's so fresh, even though it's so long ago, it seems like. And I realized at that moment what had happened is that as a mom, you just hold your breath for 9 months, and you don't even realize you're living that way. And then when you see him, you're just like, oh,
So relieved.
like, okay, there it is. This officer in the Army who men call sir, and yet to you, it's your boy, And so I remember after the first deployment, we went out to dinner, and he was all excited, and he was telling us everything, and he was starting to share some of the things, and I was like really taken aback. I was not ready for it. And obviously I'm not very good at hiding my emotions. And he's like, Mom, it's my job. And I said, I know it's your job, but you're my son. I have to grapple with this. So he pretty quickly stopped sharing any of the details of what had happened over there. And, good or bad, I wish I could have been more open to hearing that. But, he's found other ways to share and with other people, and that's okay,
You were talking about Chris's first deployment.
Yes.
And how you communicated with him through Skype. Did you get emails from him? Or could you email him?
I'm trying to remember. We must have, but it didn't seem, it obviously wasn't as frequent as we wanted. But he was good about trying to communicate and whatnot. They're busy, right? And the time change and all of that going on. So we heard enough from him that we knew he was okay and everything was all right. I was telling Carl here with Reese Across America about I remember Skyping once, and it was a pretty big deal. And Christopher was exhausted. I don't know what had been going on, but he was sitting there, and again, I mentioned he's a big guy, and he's sleeping in these Army cots, and I just keep thinking how uncomfortable that is. And he was so tired and so exhausted, and I was trying to be really positive, and everything's great, and you're doing great, and inside I was just like shaking, like I don't know how to explain, but seeing your child like that, you're just wanting to go over and take care of him and comfort him and do all those things. And I can't say any of this because he's a lieutenant in the Army, and he's in charge of men, but yet your mom's heart is hurting for him. So again, I don't wear my emotions quietly, but I think I managed to get off the Skype and then kind of like just fall apart and think it was really hard to see him, which you would think you would be overjoyed that you could, and in a lot of ways I was, but he just was so tired. He was so tired.
So you're seeing the reality of what
Yeah.
this experience is doing to him.
Yeah. And I remember, like, I think I have a couple of Facebook posts where, the memories pop up, and it'd be like, oh, I just missed a call from Christopher. So he could call once in a while. And I'd be so frustrated that I missed the call because of whatever I was doing, but yet no, he called me. So again, we're good, everything's good. So the little bit of communication that we had back and forth just made it a little bit easier along the way.
And you said you did get a few letters from him that you...
I have letters at home, so we got Christmas packages, and I can't remember if it was the first or second deployment, but his sister and I, would get gifts for him, but then all the guys and snacks and all that. And he would send a letter back saying, you know, they received the package and, you know, it was gone in a matter of minutes and those types of things. So, yeah, so those are all precious things that I still have.
And when he was there in Afghanistan, was it hot there all the time, or did it get cold at night?
Yeah, so he was there in the winter, one deployment for sure. But yeah, the heat, you know, the drop in the desert, it gets really cold, really dry as well, you know, obviously in the desert. So he's got contacts and how that would affect him. And they're in uniform all the time. So there's pictures of him, you know, in uniform in the desert, and that's what they have to wear, to protection, and they have to get used to it.
So then he came back. So that first deployment was from 2011 to 2012.
Right, 9 months.
And
Came back and went back to Fort Drum.
Fort Drum.
Yep, in
and
New
that's
York.
where you and your family were there to welcome him back?
Yeah, the first time it was just Chris and I that went out, and we were welcoming him back. We got there early. He'd kept his apartment at Fort Drum, so we went grocery shopping and, you know, supplies, and got his apartment all ready for him when he came back. I think we had even gotten his truck out of storage because that was in storage while he was gone. So we took care of all those things for him, and then welcomed him home. And I'm sure he probably got leave after that, you know, for a short period of time, probably came home. That's a blur. So what happened, I just remember the welcome home. Yeah.
And then he left for a second deployment in 2013?
Yeah, so he wasn't home very long. He did meet his now wife during that time, and so his second deployment was a little bit different because she was now here waiting. They weren't engaged at that time. It was just kind of a girlfriend-boyfriend scene, and she's from New York. So yes, his second deployment, he went out, and this time he was going as, it was called an executive officer, so it was a little bit higher rank. This was the one where I was like, tell me what you're doing, but basically just trying to keep things in order and work for the guy in command. And he was there for a little while and then got transferred to Bagram Airfield and was in logistics. So working on, you know, the supply chain and guns and whatnot, and then got involved in actually deploying men back home and working those logistics out. So that one was a little different. He was in the battle for a while, but then transferred over and was doing this logistic work. So, and that was easier. I mean, second deployment was a little bit easier because you had been through it, but also that he was at the Bagram area. It was more city and, you know, more normal than thinking he's out in the desert somewhere.
Doing battle.
Yeah.
In the realm of it.
Yeah. I mean, there's dangers because that airport would get bombed and terrorist attack or whatever, but it felt safer than the first one.
So did you communicate with him during his second deployment the same way you did during his first?
Yeah. It was pretty similar, and probably, you know, everybody had been around the block once, so it wasn't that sense of urgency as much as the first time. And then also, I knew he was communicating with Megan, his girlfriend, now wife, so there was multiple channels of like, oh, hey, you heard from him, he's okay, you know, what's going on, and back and forth that way.
And that must have been reassuring.
Yeah, and nice that he had her as well. I mean, a deployment is not easy on a girlfriend-boyfriend situation, and not having, they hadn't known each other that long, so it was a true test of them, and they came through with flying colors, and
That's
yeah.
Great. That's great. And after his second deployment, when he came home, What was that like?
So we did the welcome ceremony again, but this time we had Katie and Luke with us and Megan with us. I thought I would handle it a little better, but I actually, so there was a photographer there that was taking photos, and there's a picture of Christopher walking in, or the troops are walking in, and the photographer grabbed our family, and Megan, his girlfriend, is big smiles and all excited, and Katie and Luke and Chris are kind of looking on, and I'm there with my hands up and tears coming down, and I realized it wasn't as easy in the second deployment as I thought it was. It was the same kind of reaction to seeing my son come home again. So, but that was his last deployment, and he became a captain after that, and they ended up moving. They got engaged and married, and we had, we got dressed blues for his wedding and all that. And he was promoted to captain and went to captain school in Oklahoma. So they moved there, and it was there that he decided to separate from the Army, and they ended up coming back home to Michigan. So that was 10 years, I believe, was his total service time in the Army.
And what's he done since leaving the Army?
So he is, they've been working they're in the Kalamazoo area. He's done some logistics works, but now he is working for the VA in logistics, but he's working on his master's degree in counseling through Spring Arbor. And his goal is to counsel veterans when he graduates in May. Christopher never was wounded, but did come home with some PTSD, and certainly was familiar with it with the men that he served with, men and women. So decided to make that his career goal. So he's been working full-time, school full-time, counseling, and he's a dad to a toddler and a baby, and a husband, and a son, and a brother. So he's been really busy, and he's really looking forward to me. But we're really proud of him for continuing to serve. Even though he's not in the military, he's continuing to serve his country by serving the veterans.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So from your experience of him being on these 2 deployments in a modern era,
right,
with technology that allows you a response from him within 24 hours.
Right.
Thinking back to trying to imagine what it would be like in World War II or even World War I, where you might go 6 months without a letter.
Yeah.
How do you think it was better with the modern technology, or?
In some ways, I think, though, you have to put it in the cultural aspect of what was going on. With Afghanistan, this country didn't know and maybe didn't care that much that we were at war. And so these soldiers, we weren't in it together, right? World War II, we were all sacrificing together. We were war bonds and rubber drives and scrap metal. Rationing and the news. I mean, so the mothers would have had other mothers
Supporting each other.
right, and none of that happened, as far as I know, in the Afghanistan war or probably the Iraq war. So while the communication was better, I certainly sensed, not that people were uncaring, they weren't aware, it's not part of their reality. And so you walk through it alone. There was no Blue Star Mothers Association in Michigan up here. There's some Gold Star families, unfortunately, but it's a different world than what it was in World War II. So to get to your question, I think the mothers certainly would have been horrendous not hearing for 6 months of what happened. But the community support that they would have had is so much better than what parents and families are facing even today when there's, their loved ones are overseas still. Mm-hmm. There's no one to talk to or to support.
But do you think we're getting better at that?
I don't.
Don't?
I don't see it. I didn't see it. Maybe it's happening, but I mean, there's things like the Wreaths Across America that are trying to teach the young children, what these soldiers have gone through. But on a community-wide level, we're focused on what's in front of us, right? Mm-hmm. So that's pretty different. So I don't know. Yeah. I kind of I would have loved to been part of a group of moms that could just talk about those things, and I couldn't.
And then in Vietnam, the nightly news kept a body bag count.
Yeah, Gulf War, all of those.
All of that.
Yeah, that would have been horrific. Yeah. I mean, not hearing and that kind of news.
But when he was deployed, there were news stories.
There were news.
There were
right, and you could learn quickly. Through internet search, is that his area? Is it not his area? Shoot off, hey, are you okay? So that level of communication certainly helped versus, World War II where
you get no word.
Yeah, nothing. Or the news would be weeks old or something.
Yeah. So that 24/7 news cycle.
We would not watch the news, and I could not watch a movie that had any war scenes in it. And again, certainly Christopher wasn't hand-to-hand combat like they were in World War I, but just even the thought of it. So just recently I can, if somebody's got a movie on about the war, I can watch it and not go back to that. But yeah.
It's almost like secondary trauma.
Yeah.
Yes. And your imagination.
Yeah. It's worse.
Is going crazy with what he went through.
Right.
Even though he's back and he's okay.
He's safe, he's fine, and you tell yourself that, but you get, that's why movies are so good, right? You're living in that moment. Mm-hmm. And you also kind of are projecting back to thinking what those families must have gone through. I mean, the horrors that they lived through, it's difficult. Mm-hmm. Before Christopher was in the service, I thought of, they sacrificed by going overseas. Well, actually, soldiers sacrifice every day, even if they're in the United States. I mean, he missed all his friends' weddings, holidays, special occasions. Those are sacrifices that we don't think about. Mm-hmm. He's in North Carolina. That's not a big deal. Well, it is, because they're not free to come and go as they choose. So I think there's going to be wars, and I think the key for us is just to support the military. Politically, it is whether you agree or not agree, these men and women are following orders and doing what they believe is what they're called to do. Mm-hmm. So let's support them and keep the political junk where it belongs.
So having gone through all that and come out the other side, mm-hmm. and having things turn out as well as could be expected, what advice would you have for other parents who have sons and daughters who are thinking of joining the service?
Take a deep breath and trust your child that they are doing what they feel is the right thing to do, and support them. And then try and find other families that are going through the same thing so that you have like-minded conversations and dialogue. The support is critical, and I think that's what we're lacking up here. So, they'll make it. Be proud of them, support them, and try not to cry as much. But it's an honorable service, and I'm really glad he did it, and still wanting to serve. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing your story with
I'm
us.
very, very happy to do so. Thank you.